To continue with the variety of different continuations for both sides of semi-Slav, after d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, e3. I have to mention that black has here several options. They can play bishop f5, they can play bishop g4. Also, they can play a6. Now, the main move is e6, but after e6, knight c3. Instead of playing knight d7 for black here, which will lead to queen c2 that we covered in the first part of semi-Slav. So we will consider a6 with the idea b5. This move was very popular for some time. Actually, it still is. One of the options for white is a4. Also, there is an option of bishop d3. There is an option of b3. We cannot give you all these continuations. We cannot cover everything. So as for white, we are not making this DVD for white specially, but as for white, the suggestion we have is to go bishop d3. Now, bishop d3 is one continuation, and there is also possible c5 move. And here, practically black has only one move. D takes c, bishop takes c4, and now either c5, transposing to queen's gambit, accepted. This is very unlikely for black to play, because if they wanted to play queen's gambit accepted, they would have done it on move 2. They would have taken on c4. So if c5, we get queen's gambit accepted, which we are not going to cover now. And if b5, we're going to go bishop d3, and then c5, a4, b4, knight e4. There were games with this, and white is doing okay. But as an option, if you want more stable position, then you can choose in the position, in this position, you can choose c5. That's the move that was played by Kasparov in a match against Computer Freeze, but there were plenty of other games. So main move is b6, c takes b, and knight bd7, followed by bishop d3, queen takes b6, white castles, and after c5, white goes b3. This is actually also very interesting and double-edged position. I personally prefer white here. On cd, we will take ed. We do have an isolated pawn. Black does have advantage in pawn structure, but what white has potential knight a4 and c5 square maybe week later, as well as good potential for a kingside attack, and black has bad bishop on c8. This fully compensates white's weakness on d4. Now, to cover the idea of a6 and b5, to cover possibility of a6 and b5, if black wants to play it, maybe it's more accurate to play in this position right away a6, on which a very strong move is knight c3, preparing c5. I mean, if black goes b5, and now c5. So here, black has some choices. The best move is knight b to d7. There is a possibility, a natural option is bishop g4. But this has some flaw, this move, because of h3. And now black has dilemma to go bishop h5, which they will be faced with g4 and knight e5 with possibility of f4. Black may get suffocated here. Also white is threatening h4, and it's difficult to safely place this bishop on h6. It's going to be terrible pawn structure, and also black cannot play knight bd7 because c6 pawn is hanging. But if black takes bishop takes f3, then white plays g takes f. It's a very strong positional move. The idea is to go f4 and permanently close all black's pieces. Maybe later h4, h5, maybe bishop d3. But if black makes an attempt to free their pieces, d takes e and knight d7, this was played before. However, white failed to find here decisive continuation because a player with white was a human. But player non-human white player called Rybka found knight takes d5 with decisive advantage. C takes d, queen takes d5. Notice that white has already 3 pawns for a piece. Rook a7 is forced, and now b4. And black has serious oxygen problems. They have great difficulties moving. a4 is possible later, and f4 is possible, bishop b2 and bishop d3 or bishop g2. White has, according to Rybka, winning advantage, not some advantage, the winning advantage. So this is not good for black to play. Bishop g4 is not a valid option. So the best move in this position is knight b to d7. That was played on a highest level in several games. And white plays bishop d3. And now black must go e5. If black doesn't go e5, they're going to have serious problems with the space. e5 move that was played, and there were few games just very recently played. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5, d takes e, and knight to g4. Now both white pawns are hanging. Black is getting their pawn back, but position is highly sharp and it's very playable for both sides. f4, bishop takes c5, also attacking e3, and now queen f3. That was played by Aronian against Gelfand, against Van Wely. Dutch grandmaster. And after queen b6, king e2. You can find this game, and white won the game. Then interesting, shortly after that, Gelfand played the same position against Aronian. This way Aronian was playing with black. Knight h6 was played, h3, and well, according to Ripka, after knight f5, g4, and knight e7, position is it's about equal, but it's not equal like drawish. It's still very tense position, very double-edged, and very dynamic. Anything can happen. Great position, actually, to play. I don't know which side I would prefer to play, but it's very interesting position. The more, if you can explore it yourself, using some computer agent or playing and you get against yourself and develop some feel for it, you sure will be having some advantage, some knowledge advantage and practical advantage in a game against any opponent close to your strength. So this will cover all a6 and b5 ideas for black. What else I want to introduce to you is one interesting opportunity, one interesting way to play for white. c6, knight f3, knight f6. Before we get to bishop f5 and bishop g4, so e6, well, actually white's move, e3, e6, and bishop d3. Now, what is the idea of bishop d3? By playing bishop d3, white keeps the knight on b1. And I tell you why it's important in some cases. The idea of keeping knight on b1 and developing in much later stage is that if black plays Meran variation, knight d7, see, after knight c3, d takes c, bishop takes c4 and b5, that's Meran that we are not covering now. White is avoiding Meran by playing castle. But if black insists that they want to play the same way as Meran variation, then what is going to happen after b5? Bishop d3. Now imagine Meran would be, if white didn't castle, a knight on c3. Black can go b4 attacking knight with a later c5. Here, black doesn't have this luxury because b4 will not attack the knight, and white knight is going to go to good square this way. So then they have to go a6 in order to go c5, e4. Actually, I played the game with it, and I think it was my idea. I don't know if anyone played it before. Now, bishop b7, knight c3, c5, e5, knight d5. And here, the whole idea was based on the knight g5 move. And this move creates some problems for black. And the game was c takes d, knight takes e6. That's the key point of knight g5 move. Well, there's also possible for black to play h6, then queen h5, and after g6, queen h3. White has some potential tactical threats, such as knight takes e6. And after and also bishop takes g6. So in a game, my opponent, some American master, FIDE master, he played CD after 45 minutes of thinking, and knight takes e6, f takes e, queen h5 check first, king e7, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop g5 check, knight f6. Now black thought this position may be okay for them, because if white takes, black takes, and black has some chances because of king is safe for the moment, and later maybe after rook g8 create counterplay. What happened in a game is I went f4, and later I got an advantage of one, but according to Ripka, rook f1 to e1 practically wins the game. And after rook c8, pawn takes f6, pawn takes f6, bishop takes f6, king takes f6, and here is the point of rook e1 move, and white wins now. So in this position, what black should have done is to play bishop e7. I remember I analyzed this position even before the game, and I came to conclusion that white has big advantage. Well, my analysis were all okay and good until Ripka was born, and in the late stage of the analysis, it showed some equality for black, which means that it's still okay to play for white. Well, in the worst case scenario, black draws, then it's still okay. Queen h5, g6, queen h6. Now on bishop f8, queen h3, white has very good position. So knight takes c3, b takes c, knight takes e5. This was all analyzed by me even before the game. Game was played almost like 10 years ago. D takes e, queen takes d3, queen g7. Every move is forced for now. That's why my analysis was so perfect. So castle, queen takes f7, attacking bishop and the pawn with a check, queen d5, threatening mate on g2, queen takes e6 check, queen takes e6, and knight takes e6. White has an extra pawn, black has two bishops. Rook d3, and looks like black is doing great. But after bishop e3, what I analyzed here, rook takes c3, white has powerful shot, knight takes c5, and on bishop takes c5, rook c1, giving white very, very good chances to win. However, Ripka showed that in this position, instead of rook takes c3, which is a bad move, otherwise pawn on c5 is hanging. So rook d5 move gives black very good drawing chances. And here is the truth. Now e5 his pawn is hanging. On f4, white's knight on e6 is going to be very uncomfortable. So position is equal if black wins the pawn back. Therefore, white practically has no advantage. But this is all analysis. This has never been published in any of the theoretical publication, not in on a DVD or in any book. It's just my old analysis revised and improved by Ripka, and which makes this as a very credible source of information. So in this position, big chapters are bishop f5 and bishop g4. Practically the idea of these moves, they both have the same idea, to develop the bishop before they play e6, and eventually this bishop, light square, black's light square bishop, will be exchanged for f3 knight. Well, the way it works is on bishop f5, the best move is knight c3, and now after e6, white's main move is knight h4. Well, if you wish to play bishop d3, you're going to have just a minuscule advantage, very tiny advantage in a space. That's a possibility. A lot more ambitious move is knight h4, of course, and white wants to get two bishops advantage. There are three moves possible: bishop g6, bishop e4, and bishop g6. Bishop g4, bishop e4, and bishop g6. On bishop g4, that's not very popular way to play, because queen b3, and after queen b6, white simply gets this bishop by playing h3, bishop h4, g6, g4, and on bishop g6 simply takes on g6 and goes bishop g2 due to knight takes g4 threat, goes bishop g2, and white has clear, not very big advantage, but very clear. They're going to go bishop d2, rook c1. They have two bishops, and black has difficult time achieving counterplay. So this is with a bishop g4 move. A couple of other options are bishop e4 and bishop g6. On bishop e4, we have to go f3 because we have to get this bishop eventually. However, on bishop g6, there is no rush in taking this bishop, because after hg, h2 pawn may be weak due to f3. Bishop d6 will go there. So white is going to take this bishop, but not immediately. g3 first, knight bd7, and now c takes d. And after c takes d, knight takes g6, hg, and e4. Again, white may not have very big advantage, but it's a clear one. And I really like white's position here. White is better. They have center, they have two bishops, and black has a hard time with a counterplay. And the final move, we have to, in this position, we have to cover after knight h4, bishop g6, after which we're going to take on g6, h takes g, we're going to go h3, knight bd7, bishop d2, bishop d6, rook c1, queen e7. This is based on games on a high level. Bishop e2, black castles, white castles, and now whatever black does, they can, of course, take on c4 and go e5. They can do on e5, rook e1 is possible for once. White is going to have two bishops and is going to have always a little better position. However, this position is far from being bad position for black. White just has tiny advantage that they are normally entitled to playing in most openings. Now let's go to the bishop g4 continuation. So after bishop g4, best move for white is h3, and most common continuation is bishop takes f3, because on bishop h5 we will go g4. Oh no, we will go knight c3 first. You don't have to, but the idea is basically we will need to go g4, e6, g4, bishop g6, knight e5, knight d7, knight takes bishop, hg, and bishop d2. You see, after bishop f5 or bishop g4, in bishop f5 and bishop g4 lines, black always gets stable position, and white always gets two bishops, which means that white gets a little better position. Now, white will go rook c1, eventually bishop g2. White is going to be a little better because black is going to have difficulties getting some active counterplay, but white is going to have, on the other hand, big difficulties making serious progress. So, which means position is perfectly playable for both sides. The main move after bishop g4 and h3, main move is bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, e6, knight c3, knight bd7. Those are most logical moves. Now, if black plays here bishop e7, for example, it doesn't mean any of the several moves for white. White makes the same moves. Bishop e7 could be played followed by knight d7, or bishop d6 can be played. So knight d7, bishop d3, bishop d6, castle for white, castle for black, and here white has several choices. They can play bishop d2, rook c1, rook e1 slowly and eventually go e4, or white can, what else white can do is to go e4 right away. And again, evaluation is all the same. No matter what move order we play, white is going to be a little better, and black is going to have good defending position. Ripka personally, after e4, seriously prefers white because she has a tendency of, in some cases, overestimating advantage of two bishops. D takes e, knight takes e4, and white has some advantage, obviously. So that's easily understandable. So bishop f5 and bishop g4, they are safe continuations as far as black is not gonna experience any disaster. So they're gonna be a little worse with very stable position. One other variation I have to bring to your attention after d4, d5, c4, c6. knight f3, knight f6, e3, e6, bishop d3, knight d7, and after castle, we already covered d takes c. But black can also play bishop d6. This is kind of very common move. And now white may go knight c3, after which black has very playable position. There is very popular for black d takes c, then b5, and eventually, maybe not right away, but after castling, so d takes c, after castling and white plays maybe, I don't know, b3 or bishop d2, eventually to take d takes c, b5, and bishop b7. This kind of configuration gives black very stable position. Very good counterplay. So in this position, black played bishop d6. Better move is knight d2, because now black is going to have very hard time taking on c4, because knight is going to take on c4, attacking bishop and making e5 practically impossible. So after knight d2, black castles and white plays e4. Now this position favors white, and I wouldn't recommend black to play this position. Here, black basically has two moves. D takes e and e5. In both cases, white has an advantage. Well, let's start with d takes e. Again, d takes c is not an option, because after knight takes c4, black has really bad position after e5. Very cramped position. So after d takes c, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. Here, white is better. Black has several options. If they go knight f6, we can go bishop g5, or maybe even bishop c2, followed by rook e1 and queen d3. White has much better game. But if black goes e5, then white wins a pawn, having good winning chances. Knight takes, bishop takes e5, bishop takes h7, king takes h7, queen h5 check, queen takes c5, and if black plays queen d3, then b3 move gives white serious advantage, and not because of extra pawn, which is not so meaningful in opposite color bishops, but because white's bishop is going to be much better than black bishop. But in this position, if instead of e5, that gives white serious advantage, if black tries f5 followed by e5. It was known for a while that c5 gives white better position, but bishop g5 move nearly wins the game here, because if bishop e7, then white gets decisive advantage. After bishop takes, queen takes, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and rook e1. This is very big advantage, nearly winning advantage for white. And if black tries to play queen a5, Then very powerful sequence, also found with Ripke's help, c5, bishop goes to b8, bishop b3 check, everything is forced here, king h8, bishop e7, rook e8, and bishop d6, with the idea of knight g5, coming with knight f7 check, queen h5, black is totally busted. So those are the consequences black may face if they play hyperactive. So that's not a good idea to play. So only other option in this position, we can consider e5. After e4, e5. But then e takes d or c takes d, doesn't matter. C takes d, and now e takes d also. This position is not very good for black also as well. After e takes d, knight e4, very strong. And why? Now, black has a couple of choices here. If knight takes e4 and bishop takes e4, and if black plays knight f6, then bishop g5 practically wins a d4 pawn for no visible compensation. On h6, white can simply take the knight and take the pawn. Black does not have sufficient compensation here, and there is a very difficult to give black good advice after knight e4. After queen b6, knight b6 wasn't good. After queen b6, knight takes d6, queen takes d6, knight takes d4, queen takes d5. Very strong move is b3. And this move also gives white very big advantage. And you see, knight is totally immune because of bishop takes h7, winning black's queen. And after whatever move black makes, white puts the bishop on b2, and they have two bishop advantage in a best type of position where bishops are completely open. This is also better for white. So after d4, d5, c4, c6, very frequently, at least it was very popular, and I've played it a lot, cd move and cd. And this variation was played by white for several different reasons by all kinds of players. At first, number of years ago, maybe 25, 20 years ago, Slav was not good, Slav was not known, all the variations to people that well. So they tried to eliminate a lot of complicated variations, such as, for example, Miran variation, where bishop d3, dc, bishop takes c4, b5. Then they tried to eliminate also the check defense, for example, after knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, dc. So white was taking on d5 to simplify. Some people played when they play for a draw. You can take on d5 and having extra tempo, you just play symmetrical type position hoping to a draw. I played it a lot for white, but I never picked my opening for the in a view to make a draw, because there was one particular variation that I was very much interested in, and I was fighting to get an advantage. The variation we're talking about is knight c3, knight c6. Those are the most common ways to play it. And bishop f4 and bishop f5. That for decades it was the only move black would ever make. Playing e6 is giving white a free advantage of a better bishop, f1 bishop against c8 bishop, because c8 bishop is locked, and we are not going to go through all the aspects of the chess strategy and positional play to prove that this bishop is better. So, but the most common move was for many decades bishop f5. In the last 7 or 8 years, a6 became very popular. Now let me talk about both of those moves. Well, why would white play a6 here? Why would black play a6? Because if white plays natural e3, then black would play bishop g4. And what black is hoping to do after bishop e2, take the knight on f3, because the bishop, light square bishop, is not a dangerous piece. Then play e6 and bishop d6, practically completely equalizing the game. So white started to look for some advantage in this position. And there were several different moves were tried. I just give you a quick overview. I remember when this move was just coming up, just becoming popular, I was Gata Kamsky's coach and second on World Championship match against Nigel Short. And it was towards the end of the match when Gata had a good big advantage in the match. He played knight e5 in this position, and actually I do like this move. I think it's as good a move in this position as any other. And white did get quite a big advantage, but Gata needed to make a draw and came into the draw. So knight e5 move is preventing bishop g4. If bishop goes to f5, then white either immediately take and go e3, trying to play an pawn structure. It's just quick overview, and very frequently played move bishop d7, and then e3, e6. It's also playable position, but a little advantage for white. You can